Have you ever wondered what's really lurking in the dark when you turn off the lights, or deep in those woods you think are safe to explore? Welcome to No Sleep Nightmares Reddit, where I drag you into tales so creepy they'll leave you shivering and wide awake. Today, I'm unraveling the spine-chilling mysteries of camping trips gone wrong, unexplained cries echoing through the night, shadowy figures that don't belong in our world, and things that might just be watching you right now. Stick around, because one story has a twist so bizarre you won't believe it until the very end. Something ordinary in your everyday life turning into a full-blown nightmare. Before we dive into the shadows, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to No Sleep Nightmares Reddit. Help me reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you more twisted tales to haunt your sleepless nights. Ready? Don't look away. It starts now. The second we turned off that main campground road, I should have known we were screwed. You ever get that itch in your gut? That little whisper telling you to turn around before it's too late? Yeah, I ignored it. Call it stubbornness, call it stupidity. Either way, it's why I'm sitting here now, voice shaking, telling you this story instead of sleeping soundly like a normal person. My name's Jake, by the way. I'm the idiot who thought a weekend camping trip with my girlfriend Sarah and our buddy Miles would be a nice little escape from the grind. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The main campground had been a chaotic mess. Lanterns swinging like fireflies on steroids, folks laughing too loud around bonfires that spat sparks into the night, the air thick with smoke and cheap beer. It was the kind of scene that makes you crave silence, you know. So when Sarah suggested we push a bit further out, find a quieter spot away from the chaos, I didn't argue. Miles, with his wiry frame and perpetual grin, was already bouncing in the back seat like a kid on a sugar high, muttering about how we'd have the best ghost stories out there. I should have seen that as a red flag. Miles loved tempting fate. The dirt path we took was barely a suggestion, more like a scar scratched into the earth by some half-assed tractor years ago. The car jolted over ruts, headlights slicing through the dusk, catching gnarled branches that looked like they were reaching for us. The trees pressed in tight, their trunks black and skeletal against the fading purple sky. It smelled like wet pine and something sour, like the forest was rotting from the inside out. Sarah gripped the dashboard, her knuckles white, her hazel eyes darting to me every few seconds. "This is fine, right?" she said, her voice tight with that fake calm she pulls when she's freaking out but doesn't want to admit it. "Yeah, babe," I lied, forcing a grin. "Just a little adventure." Famous last words, huh? By the time we found a spot, a cramped gravel pull-off barely big enough for the car and our tents, the sun was long gone. The air had that heavy, damp chill that seeps into your bones, and the silence. God, the silence was suffocating. No crickets, no wind rustling the leaves, just this void that swallowed every sound we made. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, the weak beam trembling as it cut through the dark. It barely lit up the gravel underfoot, let alone the wall of trees looming around us. Sarah gave me that look. You know the one, the "this is your fault, fix it" stare. Miles, meanwhile, hopped out of the car, his sneakers crunching loud enough to make me wince, already scanning the tree line like he was auditioning for a horror movie. "Quiet out here," he said, his voice too chipper for the vibe. "Perfect for some creepy shit." "Yeah, perfect," I muttered, my gut twisting. I shrugged it off like it was no big deal, but that nagging tingle was already creeping up my spine. Something was off. Way off. Setting up camp was a comedy of errors. If you think comedy includes stabbing your thumb on a tent stake and cursing loud enough to wake the dead, which, in hindsight, might have been a bad move. The three of us fumbled around, flashlights zigzagging through the dark like we were signaling aliens, or something worse. Sarah's beam kept catching on the trees, their bark glistening wet like they were sweating in the cold. Miles tripped over a root and nearly face-planted, laughing it off with that manic edge he gets when he's nervous. Me? I was too busy trying to hammer stakes into gravel that felt more like concrete, my thumb throbbing and my patience thinning. Every twig snap made us freeze. You'd think we were in a war zone, not a forest. The woods were so quiet it was unnatural, like they'd decided sound was optional that night. The hair on my neck prickled every time a leaf rustled, and I caught myself holding my breath, waiting for... what? A bear? A serial killer? A freaking forest ghost? I didn't know, but my imagination was running wild, and not in a fun way. Finally, we got the tents up. 2 flimsy nylon domes that looked about as sturdy as a house of cards in a tornado. Sarah and I would share one. Miles got the other. VIP treatment, he joked, sprawling out like he owned the place. You lovebirds can cuddle up and leave me to fend off the woodland demons. Shut up, Miles, Sarah snapped, but there was a flicker of a smile. She's got this dry wit that cuts through his chaos. Yin to his yang, you know. Me, I'm the glue, or at least I like to think so. The straight man in this trio of misfits. We started a small fire, nothing fancy, just a pitiful stack of twigs and some logs we'd hauled from the car. The flames flickered to life, casting orange light across our faces, and for a second it almost felt normal. We skewered hot dogs on sticks, the greasy sizzle filling the air with a smell that made my stomach growl. But even with the fire going, the shadows around us seemed to grow taller, stretching into jagged shapes that didn't match the trees. I swear I saw one move like it peeled off the trunk and slunk away, but when I blinked it was gone. Sarah forced a grin, her teeth glinting in the firelight. This isn't so bad, she said, though her eyes kept darting to the darkness. Miles launched into some half-baked ghost story about hikers disappearing in these woods, his voice dipping low for effect. They say you hear a cry first, he whispered, like a banshee calling your name. Real original, dude, I said, rolling my eyes. But the tension was thick and his words hit harder than they should have. Our chatter faded fast, swallowed by the night. It was like the forest was eating our voices, leaving nothing but that oppressive quiet. I tried to shake the feeling that this spot was empty for a reason, like we'd stumbled into a trap no one else was dumb enough to spring. We doused the fire around 11 p.m., the embers hissing as Sarah dumped water over them. The last glow snuffed out, plunging us into blackness so thick it felt like a physical weight. I swept my flashlight around one more time. Trees, gravel, the distant shimmer of a lake through the branches. Typical stuff, right? So why was my stomach still knotted up like I'd swallowed a rock? Sarah and I crawled into our tent, the zipper rasping shut behind us. Miles shuffled into his, muttering something about sleeping with one eye open. Good luck with that, I called, trying to sound light. Inside, the sleeping bags crinkled as we settled in, the ground hard and uneven under my back. Sarah's hand found mine, her fingers cold despite the layers. Just another camping trip, I whispered, more to myself than her. Let the forest do its thing. We'll be fine by morning. Famous. Last. Words. I don't know how long I slept. Maybe an hour, maybe 2, before something yanked me out of it. My eyes snapped open, heart thudding against my ribs. At first, I thought it was my own breathing, ragged and loud in the tight space. But then I heard it. A cry, long and wavering, slicing through the silence like a rusty blade. It wasn't a coyote. I've heard those plenty. Not an owl either. This was different, eerie, like a voice stretched thin, rising and falling in a way that made my pulse spike. Sarah stirred, her nails digging into my arm. "Jake?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What the hell was that?" "Probably an animal," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. I wanted to believe it, but that sound, it was a warning, a summons echoing off the trees like they were amplifying it. We lay there, straining to hear more, the tent walls feeling thinner by the second. The cry stopped, and the silence that followed was worse. Complete, unnatural, like the forest was daring us to move. Sarah's breathing slowed eventually, her grip loosening as she drifted back to sleep. I tried to follow, focusing on the rustle of our sleeping bags, the faint snores from Miles's tent. But that cry looped in my head, a scratched record I couldn't turn off. Just as my eyes started to droop, I heard it, a faint scraping outside. At first, I pegged it as the wind dragging a branch across the gravel, but it had rhythm, slow, deliberate, like footsteps circling the tent. Crunch, pause, crunch, closer, then farther, then closer again. My heart hammered, every nerve screaming. I told myself it was Miles, maybe sneaking out for a piss. "Miles?" I called, just loud enough to carry. No answer. Just that scraping, steady as a metronome. I pictured him out there, grinning like an idiot, messing with us. Or maybe a lost camper, stumbling around. A ranger even. Anything normal. But the doubt gnawed at me, sharp and cold. Whatever it wasn't stopping. Exhaustion won out eventually, dragging me under despite the noise. I don't know how long I was out. Could have been minutes, could have been hours, but I snapped awake to a faint glow seeping through the tent walls. Relief hit me like a wave. Dawn, finally. I fumbled for my phone. 3:07 a.m. What the hell? Confusion clawed at me. The light felt real, soft and golden, but when I peeked through the zipper, the woods were pitch black. No moon, no stars, just an endless void. My eyes were playing tricks, or maybe the darkness was screwing with me, reflecting some distant glow I couldn't trace. Sarah moaned beside me, her voice thick with sleep. "Nightmares," she mumbled. "Shapes in the trees." I muttered something about laughing at this later, but my skin crawled. That cry, those footsteps, now this fake dawn, it didn't add up. The night felt warped, like time was bending in ways it shouldn't. One second, it seemed morning was here. The next, we were drowning in shadows. I squeezed her hand, trying to anchor us both, and let my eyes slip shut again. My mind churned with images, tall silhouettes, flickers of light, but I told myself it was just imagination. If only I'd known the real terror was still waiting, coiled in the dark, ready to strike. I woke up drowning in terror, something heavy pressed on the bottom of my sleeping bag, pinning my feet. The tent fabric bent inward, creaking under the weight. For half a heartbeat, I froze, my mind screaming dream or real. Then instinct kicked in. I thrashed, screaming, a raw, guttural sound I didn't recognize as mine. Sarah bolted upright, eyes wild, clutching my arm. "Jake, stop!" But I couldn't. Adrenaline flooded me, the tent walls closing in, every shadow twisting into claws. I kicked and swung, expecting someone to lunge at us. Sarah's voice cut through, sharp and panicked. "Jake, there's nothing there!" I went still, chest heaving, the silence roaring in my ears. No growls, no footsteps, just our frantic gasps. The pressure was gone, like it had never been there. We sat there, whispering, waiting for a follow-up, a zipper ripping open, a shape bursting in. Nothing. The quiet felt like a taunt, daring me to doubt my own senses. I checked my phone, 4:25 a.m. Sarah shivered, her voice barely audible. "I dreamed of shadows watching us, and that cry. Your scream sounded like it." That hit me like a punch. Was I echoing whatever was out there? We realized Miles must have heard me lose it, so we braced ourselves to check. I flicked on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the flap. Nothing but darkness outside, no footprints, no signs of anything. I crawled out, the gravel cold under my hands, and hurried to Miles's tent. He peeked out, wide-eyed but unharmed. "Dude, what the hell was that?" he hissed. "I thought you were dying!" "I thought something was on me," I said, my voice shaking. "Did you hear anything earlier? Footsteps?" He shook his head. I stayed put. Didn't even unzip since we crashed. That sank in slow. If Miles hadn't moved, what made those steps? What pressed on my tent? We didn't say it out loud, but the decision was instant. We were done. Sarah and I yanked our tent apart, stakes clattering, sleeping bags shoved into sacks. Miles scrambled to pack, his flashlight beam jittering like a scared animal. Every rustle in the bushes had me spinning, half expecting a figure to lurch out. By 4:40 a.m., we'd stuffed the car, breath hitching in short, sharp bursts. Miles fumbled his phone light, muttering about that fake dawn he'd seen too. "Thought it was morning," he said. "What the hell's wrong with this place?" We piled in, headlights slashing across the trees. Shadows twisted, hinting at shapes that vanished when I blinked. The tires crunched gravel as we peeled out, not a word between us until the main road's streetlights glowed in the distance. Even then, I couldn't shake it. The weight on my feet, that cry, those creeping steps. It clung to me, a cold ache in my chest. We'd escaped. But whatever owned that patch of wilderness wasn't done with us, not by a long shot. Days later, back in the safety of my apartment, I couldn't let it go. The memory festered, gnawing at me like a splinter I couldn't dig out. Sarah barely talked about it, her usual sarcasm replaced by a quiet that scared me more than the night itself. Miles, true to form, tried to laugh it off over beers, but his eyes kept darting to the window like he expected something to tap on the glass. I started digging, searched online for anything about that campground, missing hikers, weird sightings, local legends, found a forum post from years back, buried in some obscure thread. Heard a cry out there, like a woman screaming but not human. Saw lights that weren't there. Never went back. Another user replied, "The woods whisper out there. They don't let go." Whisper. That word stuck. I hadn't told anyone, but in those last moments packing up, I'd heard it. A low, rasping murmur, like voices overlapping just beyond the trees. Too faint to make out, too real to ignore. Had Sarah and Miles heard it too? Were we marked somehow, tied to that place? I drove back alone a week later. Call it closure, call it madness. I had to know. The pull-off looked different in daylight, smaller, less menacing, but the air still felt wrong, thick with that sour, rot smell. I found our fire pit, the gravel scuffed from our panic. And there, near where my tent had been, was a mark, a shallow groove in the dirt, like something heavy had dragged across it. I froze. The whispers started again, faint but growing, curling around me like smoke. I bolted, heart slamming, and didn't stop until I hit the highway. Whatever was out there, it hadn't left. It was waiting. Well, there you have it. Jake and his crew thought they could outrun the shadows, but some nights, the darkness doesn't just let you go. Makes you wonder what else is out there, doesn't it? What happens when the woods stop whispering and start digging, literally. Up next, we've got a couple who thought they'd found peace in a quiet forest, until a stranger with dirt-caked hands turned their night into a living nightmare. If that first story got your heart racing, hit that subscribe button for No Sleep Nightmares Reddit. We're just getting started. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think was pressing on Jake's tent? Let's figure it out together. Stick around. The next tale's about to claw its way in. I should have known the second we set foot in that forest that we were walking into something we couldn't walk out of. You ever get that feeling like the air's too thick, like the world's watching you with eyes you can't see? I felt it and I ignored it. My name's Ethan, and I'm the genius who thought a camping trip with my wife, Lauren, would be the perfect way to unwind after a brutal month at work. Spoiler, it wasn't relaxing. It was the opposite of relaxing. It was the kind of night that makes you wonder if you'll ever sleep again without checking under the bed first. We'd spent the day hiking, winding through trails that snaked deeper into the forest than I'd ever gone before. The air buzzed with that distant hum of wildlife, birds chattering, leaves rustling underfoot, the faint gurgle of a creek somewhere beyond the trees. It was peaceful, in that bone-tired way that promises a good night's sleep. Lauren's got this quiet strength about her, you know. She's the planner, the one who packs extra granola bars and knows how to read a map when my phone inevitably dies. Me, I'm the dreamer, always chasing the next big idea, even if it's just a weekend escape. Opposites attract, right? By the time we picked our spot, a secluded clearing tucked under a canopy of towering pines, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of bruised purple and orange. The ground was soft with old needles, the air sharp with the scent of sap and damp earth. I dropped my pack, stretching my aching shoulders, while Lauren surveyed the site with her usual precision. "This'll do," she said, her voice steady, but her green eyes flicking to the shadows creeping in around us. "Yeah," I agreed, forcing a grin. "Our own little slice of nowhere." Famous last words, huh? We set up the tent quick. Well, quick for us. I'm not exactly a Boy Scout. I fumbled with the poles while Lauren muttered instructions, her flashlight beam darting across my hands like an impatient teacher. The tent went up, a flimsy green dome that looked laughably small against the hulking trees. The forest smelled alive out here, wet moss, rotting wood, a faint metallic tang I couldn't place. It was quiet, sure, but not the good kind. It was the kind of quiet that presses on your eardrums, daring you to break it. I built a small fire, the crackle of twigs snapping through the stillness. The flames licked up, casting jittery shadows that danced across Lauren's face as she sat cross-legged, warming her hands. "Feels like we're the only ones out here," she said, her tone light, but her gaze lingering on the dark beyond the firelight. "Perfect, right?" I replied, tossing another stick into the blaze. But my gut was already twisting, that nagging itch telling me we weren't as alone as we thought. Sleep hit me hard that night, the kind of deep, dreamless drop you get after a day of hiking. The tent was warm, Lauren's steady breathing a soft rhythm beside me. I'd almost convinced myself the unease was just exhaustion playing tricks, until something yanked me awake. My eyes snapped open, the darkness so thick it felt like a blanket smothering me. I blinked, trying to orient myself, the faint glow of moonlight edging through the tent fabric my only guide. I needed to pee. Nothing sinister, just nature calling at the worst possible time. I lay there debating whether to ignore it, but my bladder wasn't having it. I glanced at Lauren, still out cold, her chest rising and falling in that calm way I envied. Didn't want to wake her, so I figured I'd slip out quiet. Easy enough, right? That's when I heard it. A slow, methodical scratching, like fingers dragging through dirt, deliberate and close. My breath caught, every muscle locking up. Maybe a critter, raccoon, possum, something normal. But this was too steady, too rhythmic. My mind raced, conjuring images of claws, teeth, some feral thing sniffing around our tent. I held still, ears straining, waiting for it to fade. It didn't. I edged the zipper open, just a crack, moonlight spilling in like liquid silver. The forest floor stretched out, shadows of shrubs, jagged trunks, nothing out of place. Then I saw her, a shape, crouched low, a few feet to my left. My eyes adjusted, and the details hit me like a punch. A woman, youngish, her hair a tangled mess, hanging around her face like a shroud. She was digging, bare hands scooping dirt in slow, careful motions, like she was unearthing something precious, or burying it. She was so close, I could have reached out and touched her. How the hell hadn't I heard her before? Her posture was off, trance-like, mechanical. Dirt smeared her fingers, glinting wet in the moonlight. My pulse hammered. a cold sweat prickling my skin. I wanted to zip the tent shut, pretend I hadn't seen her, but my brain wouldn't let me. Was she lost? Hurt? Dangerous? The questions churned, each one worse than the last. I shuffled back, nudging Lauren awake. "There's someone out there," I whispered, my voice shaking. Her eyes snapped open, wide and alert, following my gaze to the slit in the tent. Without a word, she grabbed the flashlight, her movement sharp and decisive, classic Lauren, ready to act while I floundered. She flicked the beam on, aiming it through the gap. The light hit the woman square, illuminating her face, dirt-streaked, sweat-slick, her eyes hollow and distant, like she wasn't really there. She paused, hands hovering over the shallow hole she'd dug, but didn't look up. "Hey!" I called, my voice cracking. "You okay?" No response. Just that eerie stillness. Then, slow as death, she stood, letting the dirt trickle from her fingers. For a heartbeat, I thought she'd lunge or scream, but she turned, silent, and walked into the darkness, swallowed by the trees. Lauren and I sat there, staring at the empty spot where she'd been. The hole gaped in the dirt, a black maw no bigger than a dinner plate, but it felt wrong, like it was staring back. "What the hell was that?" Lauren whispered, her voice tight. "I don't know," I said, fumbling for an answer. "Lost hiker, maybe? Someone messed up?" But it didn't fit. No gear, no noise, just her digging. "We should have helped," Lauren said, guilt creeping into her tone. "Or gotten stabbed," I shot back, half joking, half serious. Dark humor's my crutch when I'm scared shitless. She glared at me, but didn't argue. I still had to pee. Great timing, right? So we unzipped the tent fully. The night air hit me, colder than before, seeping through my jacket like icy fingers. Lauren stood guard, flashlight sweeping the shadows, while I did my business. No sign of the woman, but the trees loomed taller, their outlines jagged and menacing. The forest smelled sharper now, wet earth, decay, something faintly sour like spoiled meat. Back inside, we tried to settle. "Maybe she's gone," I said, zipping the tent shut. Weird, but harmless. Lauren didn't buy it. "She was digging, Ethan, right next to us. That's not harmless." We lay back, the zipper closed, but sleep was a lost cause. Every rustle outside made me flinch, picturing her crouched inches away, those hollow eyes fixed on us. The tent felt flimsy as paper, no match for whatever she was, or whatever she wanted. I drifted off eventually, fitful and uneasy, my dreams a mess of dirt-streaked hands and whispers I couldn't catch. I jolted awake to a metallic clatter, sharp, real, not a dream. My gut twisted, adrenaline spiking. Lauren's eyes met mine, wide with the same dread. Something, or someone, was out there, picking through our gear. Pots clanging, utensils scraping, a soft shuffle over the pine needles. "She's back!" Lauren hissed, her voice barely audible. I unzipped the tent slow, quiet as I could, stepping out with the flashlight gripped like a weapon. Lauren followed, her breath hitching. There she was, the same woman, crouched low, head tilted as she poured through our supplies. Pots and water bottles scattered around her feet, her filthy hands inspecting each item with a creepy, childlike curiosity. Her clothes were ragged, streaked with mud, her hair a wild tangle. She didn't look up, didn't seem to care we were there. "Hey!" I called, louder this time, my voice cutting through the hush. "That's ours. You need help or something?" The flashlight beam hit her face, those glinting, empty eyes locked on nothing. She let a metal cup drop, the clatter echoing like a gunshot. No answer, just that stare, unblinking, feral. Lauren stepped closer, her voice softer. "Are you okay? Lost?" Nothing. I backed toward the tent, not wanting to push it. Confronting a stranger in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal? Yeah, not my idea of a good time. Let's just wait her out, I whispered to Lauren. She'll leave. We retreated, zipping the tent shut, listening to every scrape and shuffle. It felt like a standoff. Us inside, her out there, rummaging like she owned the place. My mind spun. Was she harmless? Crazy? Something worse? The sounds faded eventually, and I exhaled, hoping she'd wandered off. Then the digging started again. Slow, deliberate, right next to the tent. So close, I swore I felt the vibrations through the ground. Lauren flinched, her nails digging into my arm. "She's back," she said, voice trembling. I'd had enough. "Stop it!" I shouted through the fabric, my voice raw. A frantic shuffle answered, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, like a startled animal bolting. I ripped the zipper open, flashlight slashing the dark. She was gone, swallowed by the night. We didn't sleep after that. Every minute dragged, the forest closing in with a suffocating weight. Lauren clutched the flashlight, sweeping it through the tent walls while I strained to hear any hint of her return. The air grew heavier, thick with that sour rot smell, like something dead was festering nearby. Dawn crept in slow, a weak grey light filtering through the canopy. We unzipped the tent, stepping into a scene that looked like a tornado hit it. Gear scattered everywhere, cookware dented, clothes tossed, water bottles punctured, and that hole, now a foot deep, jagged and raw, like she'd clawed it with desperation. No footprints, just smudges of dirt, no trace of where she'd gone. "She touched everything," Lauren said, her voice hollow. "What was she looking for?" "No clue," I muttered, scanning the trees. "But we're not sticking around to ask." We packed fast, half expecting her to lunge from the shadows. The forest felt alive now, too alive, every rustle a threat, every shadow a shape waiting to move. I kept glancing back, picturing her crouched behind a trunk, watching us leave. We hiked out, the trail stretching longer than it should have, the air buzzing with a tension I couldn't shake. Back on safer trails, I realized I'd been holding my breath, waiting for her to follow. She didn't, or so I thought. But the image of her digging, that hollow stare, stuck with me, a splinter in my mind. Weeks later, safe at home, I couldn't let it go. Lauren tried to move on, her practical side kicking in, new locks on the doors, a security camera she didn't explain. Me? I dug deeper. Online forums, old news clippings, anything about that forest. Found a post from years back. Saw a woman digging out there at night, heard whispers from the ground. Never camped again. Whispers. That word hit me hard. I hadn't told Lauren, but as we'd packed up, I'd heard it. A low, rasping murmur, like voices rising from the dirt. Too faint to understand, too real to dismiss. Was it her? Something else? I went back alone against every ounce of sense. The clearing looked smaller in daylight, the hole still there, deeper somehow, like it had grown. The air stank of rot, and the whispers started again, louder, curling around me like tendrils. I bolted, heart pounding, and didn't stop until I was miles away. Whatever she was digging for, it wasn't gone. It was waiting, under the earth, in the shadows, whispering my name. Ethan and Lauren might have escaped that hole-digging enigma, but the forest isn't done with us yet. What's more unsettling than a stranger pawing at the earth outside your tent? How about something that doesn't just watch, it moves with you? Coming up, we're riding shotgun with a group of friends who took their four-wheelers deep into the wild, only to find out they weren't the only ones on the trail. If these stories are keeping you up, don't forget to subscribe to No Sleep Nightmares Reddit. We've got plenty more chills on the way. Hit the comments. Who or what do you think that woman was digging for? Your guesses keep the nightmare alive. Buckle up. The next one's revving up now. You ever have one of those days where you can feel the storm before it hits, not in the sky, but in your bones? That's how it started for us. My name's Riley, and I'm the guy who thought a weekend tearing through the woods on four-wheelers with my crew would be the ultimate escape. Spoiler, it wasn't an escape. It was a trap, and we rode right into it with grins on our faces. It kicked off at my buddy Nate's place, the morning after a storm that had ripped through town like a pissed-off giant. The air outside was thick, charged with leftover humidity and something else. Something edgy I couldn't pin down. Nate's living room was a mess of camping gear and half-empty beer cans, the usual pre-trip chaos. There were four of us, me, Nate, Tara and Cole. Nate's the loudmouth, all bravado and bad jokes, the kind of guy who'd wrestle a bear just to say he did. Tara's the quiet one, sharp-eyed and steady, always 3 steps ahead while the rest of us stumble. Cole's the wild card, twitchy, restless, like he's running from something he won't name. And me? I'm the glue, or at least I pretend to be, keeping this ragtag bunch from killing each other. We were supposed to be pumped, but the vibe was off. Nate fumbled with bungee cords, swearing under his breath. Tara stared out the window, her dark hair pulled tight, her fingers tapping a rhythm only she could hear. Cole paced, his boots scuffing the floor, muttering about the storm leaving weird vibes. I swallowed my own nerves, chalking it up to group jitters. "Let's just get out there," I said, forcing a grin. Mud, beer, and no cell service. What's not to love? We loaded up 2 four-wheelers, each dragging a little wagon stuffed with tents, water jugs, and whatever else we'd grabbed in a rush. The engines growled to life, a low rumble that cut through the sticky air. Nate whooped, revving his throttle like a kid with a new toy, while Tara shot him a look that could have curdled milk. Cole climbed on behind me, his grip on my shoulders tighter than it needed to be. We rolled out, tires kicking up gravel, and for a minute it felt right. Wind in our faces, the promise of freedom ahead. Then we hit the trail. The forest swallowed us whole the second we veered off the main road. The trail was a muddy mess, ruts slick with storm runoff, twisting deeper into a world that didn't buzz like it should have. No birds chirping, no squirrels darting through the underbrush, just the snarl of our engines and the squelch of tires sinking into the muck. The trees pressed in tight, their trunks black and glistening, branches clawing at the sky like they were trying to escape something below. The air smelled sour, wet earth, rotting leaves, a faint whiff of something metallic, like old blood. I kept my eyes on the path, hands gripping the handlebars, but that itch in my gut wouldn't quit. Usually we'd be shouting over the engines, tossing insults or dumb bets, Nate daring someone to jump a ditch, Tara calling him an idiot. Not this time. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the occasional sputter of the four-wheelers. I caught Tara glancing over her shoulder, her jaw tight, like she'd seen something in the trees. Cole's breath hitched behind me, hot against my neck. "You hear that?" he muttered. "Hear what?" I shot back, louder than I meant to. "Nothing," he said, too quick. That's the problem. He was right. The forest was too quiet, unnaturally so, like it had been hollowed out and left to fester. I pushed the thought down, focusing on the trail as it wound tighter, forcing us into detours around fallen branches and slick ruts. The sunlight faded fast, shadows stretching long and jagged across the mud. A couple miles in, we stopped by a crooked old stump. The wood split and blackened like it had been struck by lightning years back. I leaned against the wagon, catching my breath, the humidity clinging to my skin like a second shirt. That's when I saw it. A streak of movement, maybe 30 yards ahead. Too fast, too upright for a deer. My stomach dropped, a cold sweat prickling my spine. Nate saw it too. His grin faltered, his face going pale under the dirt smudged across his cheeks. "What the hell was that?" he said, voice cracking. "Probably nothing," Tara lied, her eyes locked on the spot where it had vanished. Cole shifted, restless, his fingers twitching like he wanted to bolt. I forced a laugh, dry and hollow. "Great. We've been out here 10 minutes and we're already jumping at ghosts." Dark humor's my shield when shit gets weird, but it didn't land. None of us bought the nothing excuse, but we climbed back on and kept going, the engines roaring like they could drown out the unease. By the time we hit the clearing, daylight was a memory. The storm had chewed up the trails, slowing us to a crawl, and the forest felt darker than it should have. Thick, oppressive, like it was soaking up the last scraps of sun. The spot was small, barely big enough for our gear, ringed by trees that loomed like silent sentinels. The ground was damp, spongy with moss and needles, the air heavy with that sour rot smell that stuck in your throat. We spread out, uneasy glances bouncing between us as we hunted for flat ground. Every twig snap made us flinch, every breeze rattling the leaves overhead sounding like a whisper we couldn't catch. Tara moved with purpose, her flashlight beams steady, while Nate fumbled with tent stakes, cursing loud enough to wake the dead, which in hindsight wasn't the best idea. Cole hovered near the wagons, his eyes darting to the shadows, his usual jitteriness dialed up to 11. Me, I jammed stakes into the soil, hands unsteady, the damp earth sucking at my boots like it wanted to pull me under. "Let's get a fire going," I said, voice rough. "Chase off this creepy-ass vibe." Nate nodded, piling branches into a haphazard stack, his bravado flickering like the first sparks. The flames caught, a weak glow pushing back the dark, but the shadows warped around us, stretching into shapes that didn't match the trees. I swear I saw one shift, tall, narrow, peeling off a trunk and slinking away. But when I blinked, it was gone. Tara noticed too. Her voice cut through Nate's half-arsed laugh. "You see that?" "See what?" he said, too loud, too fast. But his eyes betrayed him, flicking to the tree line. We froze, the fire crackling like it was mocking us, waiting for that shape to move again. It didn't, just stood there, a silhouette blending with the dim light, still as death. Then, faster than my brain could process, it bolted, darting deeper into the woods with a gait that wasn't human, too jerky, too wrong. "What the fuck?" Cole breathed, his voice barely audible over the snap of the flames. Night crashed in hard, a blackness so thick it felt like a weight on our chests. We huddled around the fire, the glow warping the trees into twisted faces that flickered at the edges of my vision. No one suggested ghost stories. Nate's usual shtick felt too real now, his loudmouth energy replaced by a twitchy silence. Tara sat rigid, her flashlight clutched like a lifeline, while Cole rocked on his heels, muttering under his breath. I gripped my knees, ready to jump if something, anything, came crashing through. "We're fine," I said, more to myself than them. "Just a deer or some shit." "Yeah, a deer with a grudge," Nate quipped, his laugh forced and brittle. Dark humor was all we had left, but it didn't stick. The quiet pressed in, broken only by the fire's hiss and the occasional crunch beyond the light. Too close, too deliberate. I whipped my head around, expecting eyes glinting in the dark, but saw nothing. Just endless trees and undergrowth swaying like they were alive. "We can't ride out in this," Tara said, her voice flat. "Too dark, too muddy. We'd wipe out." "Great," Cole snapped. "So we're stuck here with whatever that was." "Let's keep watch," I said, grasping for control. "2 up, 2 down. Sleep if you can." Like that was going to happen. I took first shift with Tara, the lantern's faint glow painting our clammy hands in sickly yellow. The others crawled into their tents, the zippers rasping shut like a final goodbye. I lay there, ears straining, every pause between the fire's crackle stretching into eternity. That's when I heard it. A low, rasping murmur, like voices overlapping just beyond the trees. Too faint to make out, too real to ignore. Tara's head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine. "You hear that?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, my mouth dry. "What the hell is it?" She didn't answer, just tightened her grip on the flashlight. The whispers grew, curling around us like smoke, a chorus of nonsense that burrowed into my skull. I pictured that shape out there, lips moving, calling us deeper. The night dragged on, hours limping by, the murmurs fading then surging, teasing us with silence before striking again. Dawn crept in slow, a dreary grey that barely pierced the canopy. We tore down camp like our lives depended on it. Because maybe they did. Sleep or no sleep, we weren't staying. Nate ripped stakes from the ground, his hands shaking, while Tara shoved gear into the wagons with a precision that bordered on panic. Cole paced, his eyes wild, scanning the trees like he expected that shape to lunge out any second. I hauled the tents, the damp fabric sticking to my arms, the sour rot smell thicker now, clogging my lungs. The fire pit was cold, embers buried under dirt, but the ground nearby was scuffed, long, jagged grooves, like something heavy had dragged across it. My stomach dropped, a cold sweat prickling my spine. "Look at this," I said, voice hoarse. Tara crouched, tracing the marks with her finger. "Too big for us," she said, her calm cracking. "What the hell was out here?" "Let's not find out," Nate muttered, already straddling his four-wheeler. We loaded up fast, engines roaring to life, the sound a lifeline in the stillness. The sky was a dull smear, but it felt like salvation. We didn't talk about the shape, the whispers, just aimed for home, tires chewing through the mud. On the ride out, I kept glancing back, half expecting that gangly silhouette to loom between the trunks. Shadows danced in my peripheral, hints of movement that vanished when I looked. My heart hammered, Cole's grip on my shoulders a vice. Nothing chased us, at least nothing we saw. But the forest didn't feel empty. It felt alive, watching, waiting for us to slip up. We hit Nate's driveway hours later, unloading in tense silence. The relief was there, sharp and sweet, but no one wanted to say what we'd seen. "Just a weird night," I said, forcing a grin. "Right?" "Yeah," Tara lied, her eyes flicking to the trees across the road. "Weird." Back home, the memory festered. Nate brushed it off with beers and bravado, but his laugh was hollow. Tara got quiet, her usual sharpness dulled, like she was listening for something she couldn't unhear. Cole vanished for days, texting later about needing space. Me, I couldn't sleep. The whispers looped in my head, a scratched record of gibberish that felt too personal. I dug online, found scraps. A forum post from years back about a tall thing in those woods, whispers that follow you home. Another claimed the forest was cursed, a dumping ground for something old and angry. I laughed it off, until I heard it again, faint, scratching at my window one night. I went back alone, weeks later, against every shred of sanity. The clearing was still there, smaller in daylight, the grooves deeper, like claw marks stretching toward the trees. The air stank of rot, and the whispers started, louder, calling my name in a voice that wasn't human. I ran, heart slamming, and didn't stop until the trail was a memory. Whatever rode with us that night, it didn't leave. It's still out there, and maybe still with me. And there you have it. 3 tales that started with campfires and ended with shadows that don't let go. From Jake's crew fleeing a campsite that wouldn't stay quiet, To Ethan and Lauren's run-in with a dirt-obsessed stranger, to Riley's gang riding straight into something that hitched along for the ride. What ties them together? Is it the woods themselves, whispering secrets we're not meant to hear? Or something older, something that's still out there, waiting for the next fool to wander too deep? If these stories left you checking your windows, don't stop now. Subscribe to No Sleep Nightmares Reddit for more nightmares you can't unhear. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which of these haunts you the most and why? Hit that like button if you're still awake and check our playlist for more sleepless nights. Until next time, keep the lights on or don't. Sweet dreams, Reddit fam.